Hey everybody, today I am joined by, and I'm going to try to say the name. I've just taken a 30-minute tutorial on how to say the name, and I'm probably still going to screw it up, but I am joined by Remkus de Vries. De Vries.
Yes, sir.
Something like that. And I am
Remkus de Vries.
yes, I am. I am so sorry to all my Dutch friends out there for butchering the accent, which I have learned in the
But
last.
the Dutch people wouldn't get it either. It's the Frisians you
I'm
need to be
sorry, the
worried.
Frisians. The Frisians. See, I can't even tell the difference there. Remkus is here because I want to talk today a little bit about performance, and Remkus is a world-renowned expert on performance. And I'm going to take a moment and shut up, and I'm going to let Remkus introduce himself, tell us a little bit about what he does, and he has a really cool performance plugin that I hope he talks about, and then we'll get into talking about performance and what people can do in order to improve their performance. So take it away, Remkus.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, so Remkus de Vries. I live in the beautiful province of Friesland in the Netherlands. I've been working with WordPress for over 20 years now. I basically had a small agency that primarily focused on complex, very much connecting to other types of services out there, builds for the most part of what I consider my professional life with WordPress. When you do certain things that are more complex, you're usually working with larger sites or more traffic going to those types of sites. So performance was also something that it was always part of it. What I've done in the last couple of years is profile that a little bit more. As I got older, I got more interested in very particular types of sites and performance and performance optimization, scaling, and all of those things. Those are the fun bits to me when it's about building websites. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the gist of it, of how I'm doing performance things. And I have a bit of a different philosophy in terms of what is performance. For the vast majority of people using WordPress, performance is seen as one of the last steps they do, and usually is in the shape of, let me turn on that plugin, that caching plugin. Turning on of a caching plugin or even an optimized/caching plugin is a thing you should do, yes, but it doesn't actually solve your performance problems. It hides them really well. There are plenty of scenarios where that particular plugin is absolutely bypassed on every single way, and you end up with a solution that is still not performant. Anything and everyone working with a site that requires a login, for instance, as soon as that cookie is set, nothing is cached anymore, thus rendering you with bare metal and how well your WordPress site is built. So instead of always focusing on the end, so that's what most people know as the core web vitals, optimized CDNs, the whole thing that comes with caching layer and the optimized version of your front end / cache. That is a good thing to focus on, but that is at the end of where that journey is. People see that as the end of their journey of building the site, and I think this should be something they do at the front of while building and at the end.
Actually, an interesting idea. It's almost like in the old days. I don't know that you hear it so much anymore. We used to say, build for mobile first. It sounds to me like this is kind of like the build for performance first
It is.
kind of
It is.
mentality.
Yeah. A client comes to you and says, I have already a site. It's slow. I can't figure it out. Nobody can figure it out. Can you please look or take over and fix? If that site, upon opening into it, so you log in and you see their dashboard and you not only see a whole bunch of notices that haven't been processed, from simple things like update the settings because there's a new version, to very, just annoying stuff all over, you already have an idea. There's going to be a lot of plugins in this site. And I've seen many, many times that I greeted with a lot of noise, click on plugins to see what plugins are installed, and I have a list of somewhere between 50 and 150 plugins. If I find 3 or 4, I think my max is 5, but if I find 5 page builders in there, you don't know what you're doing. And I don't see 5 a lot. I don't see 4 a lot, but 3 quite common, 2 very common.
Okay.
So they'll use, I don't know, ThriveCart combined with Elementor. I get it. I can see how that becomes a thought that you have, and then, here's a fix for that, because Thrive certainly solves my landing page building things and conversions and all that. And Elementor is my thing on top of WordPress that helps me to visualize my build. And I get it. I get how you get to the point where that is the choice you make, but it's not the smart choice. It's not with performance in mind. It's not with simplicity in mind.
Of course, we've all seen this where people go for, oh, my site is slow. I'm just going to install a caching plugin and everything will be hunky-dory, and then they discover it's not. And you mentioned that once the cookie is set, that those caching plugins don't really do much. Did I understand that correctly?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct. Yep.
so can you give me examples of situations, very common situations that people deal with every single day where that cookie is set and the caching plugin isn't doing any good? Things like shopping cart situations, that type of
Yep.
thing. Okay.
Being logged in first, that's the
Okay.
most common one. So any membership site, per definition, does not have any proper cache serving other than what's on the CDN. Like the static files and stuff like that, you can still have that cached from the CDN. Generally, that's not a problem. But the generating of the site, every single page view requested by a visitor, that will be from generating it from the dashboard, from the WordPress installation itself. So you'll never have a fully cached version when you are logged in. The other one you added is any e-commerce store that uses a cart, and believe you me, they all do. Well, there's a few things, a few solutions that off-site handle that. So technically, they don't all do. But from the moment you add a product into your cart, you are then uncached. So the rest of the journey for that client, for that customer, is uncached. Meaning, again, the CDN things probably still work, depending on how it's set up. But every single thing that you then see, so it doesn't matter if that's one product, 20 products, or whatever, that whole journey is uncached, meaning you are relying on the speed of the server and the application itself.
So if you're using a service that tests the performance of your site, you go online and you're running what is it, GT metrics or something like that, is it difficult for that to actually run a real world test then on those types of situations? Would it not be?
So all of those services in generally are testing your cached version of your site. They don't test your site. Now, you can enter a URL into that service that is an uncached version, but that will be only uncached for the first request, right? So if you were to say $V is 53489, whatever, some random number, the first request that's being done for that particular suffix is then an uncached version, and then your browser's already cached, or the server caches it something. I mean, it's not a black and white. It's not that they all do or don't, but generally that is a cache busting version of a URL. And depending on, certainly your browser is caching it. Hopefully the service that you're using is not using a cached version going forward. But my experience is that most of them are doing that.
So do you run
So
in?
you're not really measuring.
I'm sure you've run into then, the customer says, well, my website, I just pulled it up and it got a C rating the first time and then an A rating the next time. That's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah. So the first request is an uncached, and then it's a cached version. Yeah, everything's fine.
Yeah. Okay. What do you do to counter that when you hear that? Because I'm sure you hear it a lot.
Yeah, so I'm generally not a fan of those types of services because of the metrics that they present to be the holy grail, which it isn't. And the reason for this is actually quite simple. So any metric that you devise, there is a way to build a site specifically for that metric. Meaning you can have a site that looks like it's performing really well, but as a human visiting that site, you go, this is crap. What is this? And vice versa. You can have a very, very fast site that scores low just because of how the metric is interpreting what is being downloaded, when, what, and where. Now, those are the edge cases, but the principle, depending on which service you use, is becoming larger or smaller. So it's not a fair way. It's you call it an indication. Depending on how it's testing, what it's testing, when it's testing, how often it's testing, if it's using a median or just a prime or whatever, there's different ways of saying, okay, whatever I just saw, it gives me an indication of things that I need to look at. I, for instance, prefer to at least look at the core web vitals. Those make more sense in the regard that when you do that, which you can test. So the Google Lighthouse testing is the same thing. You can do that within your browser, but also as soon as I say that, so that test will tell you on 5 different metrics how your site ranks. So ideally, you score 5 times 100. The caveat here is the same as any other service. You are testing not in real user, right? So it's a laboratory type of testing. A real user will see different things. So there are services out there that test the actual user experience of a user. So they call them RUM or UM. That is, for instance, way more indicative of what the actual perceived performance of your site is. So if we're relying too much on the GT metrics types of sites, we're missing the bigger picture, is basically what I'm saying.
I come into a cowork every day, and I deal with many people actually here who have their own websites, and it seems to me like I'm always hearing performance questions, and it's because they've gone to a GT metrics or something like that, and done a test. This is really more a matter of education, because I mean, if given all things kind of being equal, it would seem to me like it's more important what the user experience is than what the
metrics says.
The metrics say. However,
agreed.
However, I don't know if this is a myth or is this actual fact that Google and search engines algorithms base a certain part of your ranking on that testing. So
what that sentence is technically correct. However, the portion of it is way smaller than people think. There's plenty of sites that rank really high competitively that are just slow, but they have domain authority or just really great content. If you ask somebody who is truly specialized in that realm, like somebody like John O. Alderson, he will tell you that yes, it's important. Yes, it should be optimized, but it's a very small cog in a whole bunch of larger cogs. So if you want to have the best ranking in Google, there's way more going on than just optimizing for performance. You should, because 99 out of 10 out of 100 times, the optimization for performance will produce a better functioning site, faster, a more pleasant to navigate type of site. But let that be the primary reason you do it, and enjoy a little bit of benefit in terms of rankings and things like that. But the whole why is my site not ranking, or is my site ranking high on Google, is way more complex than just making it fast. If the user does not benefit, it can be blazingly fast. It's not going to help the user. So the user is not benefited by being sent to your site, so they won't.
So when people are basing their performance scores in order to get a higher search ranking, it's kind of much ado about nothing. It really is about the user. I don't want to go as far as saying nothing. Okay, but
it has an impact, but it's not like 33%.
Yeah.
Right. It's not a big chunk of a pie.
Would you say it's a diminishing return if you're not focused on those other important things, that focusing on getting good metrics on some of these lab testing tools, we'll just call them, like GT metrics or whatever, you shouldn't necessarily put your focus on that. It's really about, and I know that we're getting a little bit into the SEO kind of conversation, which is a totally different conversation, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is don't focus so much on that. Focus on the content. Performance is measured in other ways that have to do with the user and the user experience. And
for me, that's one step too far to say. What I would specifically say is focus on making your site as fast as possible and as usable as possible and as helpful as possible.
Okay.
So the combination of the three is the thing I would look at.
Okay.
So for instance, if you have an e-commerce site, let's say you have WooCommerce installed, and from the moment a customer or potential customer adds something to cart, and then the next page load takes you 5, 6, 7 seconds, you're not going to be favorably ranked no matter what.
Okay.
So you do want to focus on that, very much so. But you need to understand that the performance and optimization side of things, you don't translate it into, okay, so that's 25% of the ranking done. That's not how it works. It's in some places it can be maybe 25%, but more likely a few percent.
Okay.
There's too many variables there to give you a very straightforward answer where we could say, Mark, this is it, we're done.
Okay.
I can't give you that because that factually does not exist.
Okay.
What I can say is if you focus on performance and make your site faster, the experience of the user is just greatly improved. Now that is a ranking factor because that we can measure. That is visible.
I'm kind of curious how it's possible to measure user experience. I'm kind of curious as to how that's done. Do you have any insight onto that, other than just talking to users? But obviously, Google,
So there's
Google's
tools
not
out
gonna do
there.
that, yeah.
If you Google RUM, RUM, and then management or measuring or analytics or whatever, you'll find plenty of solutions out there that solve that problem where you can actually measure what somebody actually sees happening on your site.
Okay.
And those are, I think, incredibly interesting to see what's actually going on there.
Okay.
A part of it, not really, but kind of, is the service that I started together with my co-founder Buddy. It's called ScanFully, and we have a performance metric in there that currently is looking at what happens in the time to first byte, and then right after, like the initial, like the TLS handshake, the download content, the actual time to first byte, things that are way more determining in the actual first impression of your site. And we measure that in a way that's what somebody else would also see.
I see. Okay.
And having that particular focus, instead of saying, let's create another whatever service that like Pingdom it's great, or GT Metrics, whatever. We have an uptime monitor in there as well. And we're also making different choices in how we're measuring that you are up, knowing that the actual user might see things different. I'll give you a very simple example. If I ping your site and I get the HTTP status code of 200 back, which means A-OK, that really means absolutely nothing because I don't know if I actually pinged your site or if I pinged your cache.
Right.
I don't know. So you'll need to have a cache busting version of that as well. And ideally, you also need a generated HTML tag that says, not visible, but that says this is recently generated, so you are looking at a fresh site that is up. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's a different thing, right? So what the actual experience of a visitor will be is something you would want to measure as much and as close as possible versus just having stale metrics.
We keep talking about cache, so this is the talk to me like I'm a fifth grader portion, which is what are the different types of caching that we talk about? Object cache, we talk about, edge caching and all these different types of caching, which, I think that to most people caching just means, it increases load time, it increases quote unquote performance. What do they all mean?
From the moment the request starts, so you type in whatever URL, you hit enter in your browser. That is the first moment you may start encountering cache, because the first level is DNS, and DNS caching is already a thing. But let's not overcomplicate it. From the moment the DNS is pointing to that server, the request for that server is being made, and whatever then happens on that server, combined with the application layer, that is your total layer of caching. So that's depending on what you set up. The most basic version is an HTML version of your site. So meaning your article, instead of WordPress having to generate the whole front end, it's already there. There's a cached version of it. It's a previously generated output. And to your browser, that's the same thing, whether WordPress is that just generated that or the actual rendered HTML was already present on the server, and we just serve that. So that is the most obvious version of cache that you would encounter first. I'm going one step back now. So if I were to use a service like Cloudflare or NitroPack, then my cache doesn't actually live on the server. So the rendered HTML doesn't live on the server. It lives in a server before your physical web server. We call that the edge. I don't know why. Maybe it's a big U2 fan. Who knows? But there's a layer that happens before the actual request to your server is done. And I'll take the very simple example of Cloudflare. They have, I think, 350 plus data centers across the world. So if a fully generated HTML version of the page you just request exists on one of the 350 data center points across the globe, then it's going to be serving that version first. Meaning Cloudflare is proxied in front of your site. So when you hit enter in the address bar, it is proxied, meaning the request is going through Cloudflare service, and Cloudflare's service knows there's a copy of the URL you just requested on their system, so it'll serve that. So meaning your server will not even see that visit. That is the HTML cache and then put in front of it, so the edge caching. Then inside of that rendered HTML, or that one particular page you just requested, you have various types of generated data. Let's take the archive page, for instance, of the month of December for all your blog posts.
Okay.
The query that needs to be done inside of WordPress that generates, this is the list of the December posts. That query is essentially something you don't need to repeat over and over and over. The mechanism that stores that in the database as the end result of the query. So you do the query has a result. That result is then saved, and let's call them transients, because in not trying to complex things, but the transient is where that rendered query is actually stored. Now, the next time that archive is requested from the month of December, it's not actually going fully back to the database. It's going to the object cache level version of the result of that query, and it presents that inside the rendered HTML of your header, your footer, and all the other things going on that site. So that's object cache. And I think instead of overly complicating whatever other things you could do, so for instance, the menu, you could cache the result of the menu, again, the rendered HTML of what is your menu. You could store that as a transient as well. And you can have other little bits of elements on your site that, for instance, generally don't change within 24 hours, roughly, give or take. You would store those as a transient as well, and those would be in your database. And whether you retrieve them via object cache or not is then less relevant, but you can have fragmented cache pieces. Okay. So all these things you do to make the actual query for that whole URL, you can reduce various levels and various elements of what do we need to retrieve.
I imagine there's more to it than this, but edge caching is just another way or a fancy way maybe of saying CDN, or are they not always the same?
No. Again, with the Cloudflare example, Cloudflare provides a CDN as well, a CDN service. It's not a CDN dot whatever your site is .com.
Okay.
Cloudflare basically says whatever static object you have, so images, PDFs, videos, all of these things, JavaScript files, CSS files, you name them, they could live in an optimized location relative to your server's location. So again, the 350 points across the globe, a version of your style sheet of the theme that you're using is being moved across those 350 data centers.
Okay.
And the CDN part is that it is intentionally being offloaded because it can be. And here's the same logic goes. If you don't need to make that request over and over again from the server doesn't have to do it. It can live at the edge. Then by all means, have it live at the edge. That is the functionality of a CDN. And there's different ways of implementing it. Cloudflare, like I said, doesn't make it a hard integration in terms of it's connected to your domain and on a subdomain, and that's where your CDN then lives. No, Cloudflare just says, we know what your static objects are. We'll cache them for you. Done. Don't worry about how that is named, how that is stored. We're solving that for you. No need to worry about that. A service like NitroPack does the same thing. You don't have to think about what is the CDN.
Okay.
Like there is a CDN. It's just fully integrated through the service of Cloudflare that you are using, and then no need to think about that anymore. To bridge the two, the Cloudflare, for instance, has their APO service. That service generates an optimized version of your HTML and then offloads that to the same data centers it's using for your CDN. So it's kind of offloading the HTML as it were a static object to all those data centers as well. So that's kind of how you can see the edge. Like whatever we can store there, whether that is a generated HTML version of your requested URL or the static files that are requested in that generated HTML, we can all offload those from the server and store it there. So if your site is hosted, I don't know, in Sydney, but you requested in Vancouver, Canada, doesn't really make a lot of sense to travel all the way across the globe to retrieve that and then bring it back. If the data center that is in Vancouver can also have a version of that, and you have a faster site.
Sure. And then once again, this only works on static information and not on anything that's generated dynamically. So things like your shopping cart, when you've added something to your shopping cart or you've logged into an e-commerce site, or I think one of the things that a lot of people pay very little attention to until they have to actually spend time there is in the WordPress dashboard. None of that is cached either. That's all generated. That's dynamic, and so if you happen to host on a service or a server that is not optimized, you're going to run into slowness in your dashboard where you might not in a better server. Is correct?
I have clients who have 600, 700,000 published articles. If you have an unoptimized server loading the overview of posts, just get yourself a cup of coffee. If you have a WooCommerce store that has, I don't know, 500,000 orders, checking out those orders, again, get yourself a cup of coffee. Grab a cookie while you're at it.
I think you could probably drive down to Starbucks and come back, right?
Possibly. That means your hardware needs to be able to take care of that request as well, because it's raw. There's nothing cached. There's nothing internally cached. It doesn't make sense because it needs to be raw. And this is where you need an optimized hosting environment. There are things you can do in relation to the object cache layer. You can turn on Redis. You can start adding Object Cache Pro by Til Cruz. That is a perfect plugin that connects to your Redis layer in front of your database. So, there's a lot of optimization still possible, but it all starts with understanding how your hardware works, how your database layer works, how that's optimized or unoptimized, and go from there. But it starts there. Your foundation needs to be good. You can't go, let me just slap some caching on, because again, it's not going to work.
Right. So that leads right into my next question, and probably maybe even the most important question is, and I'm sure you get this a lot, how do you choose your host? I mean, if you're a WordPress user, you go on the Facebook WordPress groups and everything, and that question comes up like every other day: which host is the best, right? And of course, that's such an open-ended question. But if your foundation isn't good and you don't, you have a plan for what you're going to do with your site, but your foundation isn't good, how do you know who's got the right foundation? And I'm not asking you to plug any host, although certainly if you have a host that you like better than another, I'm not going to keep you from mentioning it. But what kind of tools do people need to be able to determine whether or not their host or the features of that host are right for them?
Yeah. So the feature set is where it starts, right? We can discuss whether support is part of the feature set. To me, it's a less important factor. That's mostly because I'm technically savvy enough to understand things I'm running into and figure it out myself. For many people, the support is one of the most important things, and I get that. No hate there, no shame. But if you look at it from a pure metal perspective, then out of the box, any site should work and be fast. Meaning, whether your database is 60 gigabytes or 60 MB, it really shouldn't matter. Because in my opinion, a host needs to have a few things done perfectly so that particular bandwidth is just never a problem. And the second layer is you don't need to buy I think the popular thing here is, you don't need to buy a Ferrari to bring your kids to school, right?
But it'd be nice.
Probably not.
I couldn't
I'm
imagine.
193, 6'4". I don't fit in most cars. Cabins. But sure, Ferrari would be nice. I'd be cramped, and it's not a car that is built for being a daily driver.
Right.
Let me put it like that.
It's fun once you get in, but
and then you're stuck.
Yeah.
But the idea behind that logic is, if you have a site that has maybe 3,000 visitors a month, highly converting, it's doing for you what it needs to do, but you're thinking of getting the most premium expensive hosting because that's what you think you need. I mean, from a purist standpoint, yes, you do, because you get what you pay for. Mm-hmm. But do you really need the very, very, very fastest, the very, very most spiffy thing, everything on it? Possibly not. So there is a bit of a balance there, right? So it's not just the, let me get the fastest and I'll always be done and great. I tend to say, try to find what is most reasonable to you and then get creative with the service that the hosting companies are offering you. If you want to know the actual, like technically, how good is it, then there's a Kevin Ohashi. He's got Review Signal. He tests this rigorously. So once a year, he does a full benchmark of everybody who is applied to be tested. It's not full, so it's not everybody. But the end result of his tests, which are testing bare metal, uncached versions of sites, and it'll tell you how much volume a database can process. It'll tell you how fast the site is, the time to first byte, all these little things. And he has a very good overview of every single test run that he does. So you can then look at the different tiers and then pick the host that matches to what you need the most. Hosts that I think are good in general are, for instance, Rocket.net, Kinsta, Pagely, great hosts. Great hosts. The host I rely on the most is ServeBolt. So SEERVEBOLT. It's an interesting name, but ServeBolt to me solves all the problems, doesn't limit me. There's no worker limitation type of stuff. There's just, everything is blazingly fast. There's sites that I don't host at ServeBolt. So that's essentially the logic behind it, right? So there's no one answer that fits all. There's no like, you need this and only then are you saved. No, you can still seriously screw up performance on the very fastest host you find. It's just not.
But then at least you know not to look at the host as the issue, right? So you can at least eliminate the host as the issue and work your way down and say this must be software or something else and focus on that.
Yeah, one of the features we're adding to ScanFully in Q1 of 25, for instance, is we're going to add profiling to it, because we want to answer that question exactly for that same reason. You want to make sure that whatever is loading, why is a plugin like for translations, WPML is a very oftentimes used plugin, but in my experience, it's a horribly bad performing site plugin, and thus a bad site. But me saying that is one thing. Me then pointing to the data that shows profiling says that is adding 1.5 seconds to your load time. Okay, we can safely assume that that's not an optimized plugin.
Right.
Things like that are then, you can start measuring your performance, and you should always be measuring your performance in any layer, in any moment during the build, before the build, at the end of the build, to make sure that what you have built is fast.
Nice. Okay. I think that's a pretty good overview, unless you think I missed anything. And if not, then we're going to get into the part where you get to plug yourself and what you do a little bit more. So
no, I mean, I think the most important thing is to understand that it shouldn't be a one size fits all in terms of the solutions you pick. It really depends on the scenario that you're working with, what the site needs to do. I have a higher requirement for performance when it comes to being a WooCommerce site, when it comes to being a membership site, versus the site of my dad that gets maybe 300 a month, right?
That's actually that's impressive, actually, for like a personal site, 300 a month.
No, it's not a personal site, but it's
okay, yeah.
He's a therapist, so he has some legitimate requests. But the idea behind it is that I don't need to have it blazingly fast, super optimized for that type of crowd, right?
Right.
So the understanding that it's never a one size fits all, understanding that caching doesn't solve your performance problem, it hides it, it masks it, it optimizes it, But, cache hit ratio is never 100%. Be aware that you need to have your site function uncached perfectly. And that's what you shoot for while you're building it. In the middle of the build, you test it. At the end, you test it. You want to basically every single change you make to a site, you want to test what the impact of that was.
Okay.
If you start doing that, you start building fast and performing sites. Plus, you start to learn what the impact of your choice is. So if you add that particular plugin that you always add, and you see that the site just happens to become a second slower, that's a good indication that it may be a fun plugin and it maybe serves you perfectly, but it doesn't actually serve you, and maybe you should look for an alternative.
Yeah. No, I really love that concept of building for performance first, and then, use that as your foundation, and then it does make things easier to troubleshoot down the road for sure, because we all know that troubleshooting involves a lot of, okay, what did I do last?
And retrace your steps.
Yeah, and retracing your steps. So I think the only question I have, well, I have a couple more questions. One is plug time. Tell us a little bit about ScanFully and what it does, and and all of that. You kind of touched on a couple of things, but tell everybody what it really does.
So it's a SaaS solution that does site health and performance monitoring. And the way that we do it is that we have a plugin living inside of your WordPress installation that connects to our service. We do uptime monitoring, we do performance monitoring. We also pull in all the site health data inside your WordPress site in our dashboard. And we have a WordPress events timeline, so an activity log. And the combination of those is what we call ScanFully. We launched this year in July. We have a bunch of features in there already, but we're also very heavily expanding on what we have. And the goal is that we give you the information for you to get proper insight into what your site does, like uptime monitoring. Again, I think I explained, like you can just ping, but you need to do more. We're going to be adding multiple layers to what are we testing for performance. So we try to give you as much insight as we can. It's funny because one of the last things you just said before this question was you want to know the consequence of your choices, right? So if you add that plugin, or if you update that plugin, or you delete that, in an ideal world, you want to know what that consequence is in terms of performance and site health. So we're building it to do that. The activity monitor for now is pretty base. But we're going to add all these changes into it, which will have connected tests to what did that do for performance. So if you do upgrade whatever plugin to the next version, but that's a big impact plugin, and it turns out that the performance of your site became a second slower, and you do that, and somebody else does that, and then 10 people do that, then we have a signal like maybe there's something wrong with this particular update for that plugin. So we'll reach out to the plugin builder telling them, this is what we see, but we'll also notify you through a notification system, and you can have that in Slack or Discord or Pushover, like on your phone. But we'll tell you before you start updating the site, check out this plugin because we're seeing a regression of performance for this, and that. The profiling that I mentioned, we're going to add, and all of this is designed to help you understand the actual performance of your site and the actual health.
That sounds really cool.
I think so. The most exciting feature we're going to add once the next year is going to come around the corner, because this is mid-November already, so it's going really fast. Is content health monitoring. So anything you can think of that is related to content health, we'll monitor for. We'll tell you where to go. We'll tell you what to fix.
I was just going to ask that question. Does it also make like reasonable suggestions as to not only what's wrong, but what you need to do in order to...
So every single notification that we have currently is leading to a help doc that explains not just this is the notification, but this is what you need to do, or this is what you need to pay attention to, or maybe check out these and these things, because everything signals to that being the problem.
That's fantastic. Boy, that sounds very cool. And it sounds like you have a lot of cool things coming, and I imagine you'll just keep that going. So
we will. We have a way longer list than the few things that I just mentioned. So I think we're for the next 4 or 5 years, we'll be building.
Then the last question I have for you here is, when I see you in person, it doesn't matter if it's a big crowd, you're easy to find, but offline, where do people find you?
Car shows mostly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so go to all the car shows, and that's where you'll find them.
No. I work out in a strongman gym.
Mm-hmm.
I like going to car shows and I like road tripping.
Okay.
I think those are the three things I do outside of my home the most.
Okay.
Not counting groceries and other boring, mundane stuff.
Okay. And then on social media, where do people find you?
Yeah. Remkus de Vries as one word. You can pretty much find me on any platform. I'm mostly active on X,
Okay.
or formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah. We all still call it Twitter.
Yeah. I just want to be semantically correct.
I don't know. There's that rebellious. It's like, don't tell me what to call it. I'll call it what I want to call it.
Yeah. No, I have that a little, but when
Yeah.
explaining it like this, I
Yeah.
add it to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we both know, my thing is, it's like just totally off the subject, but why would you go with X? And now everything is a post, which is what everybody else does. But when you said I'm tweeting this, everyone knew exactly what that meant.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, that's a
From a branding
that's a
perspective,
marketing
it's
thing and branding. It just
yeah, it's an interesting choice there.
Yeah.
What I've learned is that he's had a fascination with X
Yeah.
as a thing
Yeah.
since, because I think at one point when he was part of PayPal, he wanted to rebrand that as X. And then the only thing I know now is that he's very consistent in it because one of the next features is going to be added to X is payments. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess he has a bigger idea than
Yeah.
both you and I understand. So
Yeah. Well, I'm sure he does. All right. Well, thank you very much. I really do appreciate you taking the time today or
sure thing.
this afternoon or evening, and I will see you around. I appreciate everything, and we'll talk to you soon.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you.